At the office party, my boss sneered, "She's replaceable. Where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it?" Subscribe now, because this story won't just entertain you. It might haunt you. I remember the first time I realized I was invisible. I was 8, sitting at the kitchen table, quietly coloring the edge of a magazine while my parents fought in the next room, their voices sharp and tangled like broken glass. My mother's anger was a cold thing. She didn't shout, she cut, slicing words straight into my father's insecurities, reminding him how little he'd achieved, how little we had, how much she had sacrificed for nothing. And my father, though big and rough around the edges, shrank under her precision, like a balloon steadily deflating. I always wondered if I was the shadow in that room, some thin line of a girl watching them carve each other open, or if maybe I was the ghost they were both angry at but never saw. That feeling of being unseen, unheard, followed me into everything I did. School. I was the girl who aced every test but whose name the teachers always paused on, flipping through the attendance sheet like they couldn't quite place me. Friendships? I was the one they came to for help, for answers, but not for parties or sleepovers. And love? Don't even get me started. I've watched men fall in love with the idea of me, but never the reality. And so when I stepped into my first real job, fresh out of college, trembling in heels that were too tight, clutching a resume I'd rewritten 6 times, I promised myself I would not be invisible here. I would be seen, damn it. I would be heard. I worked harder than anyone, stayed late, volunteered for the projects no one wanted, learned the systems inside out, made the clients laugh, made the team trust me. But here's the thing they don't tell you about ambition. It doesn't matter how brightly you shine if the people in power have already decided you're a replaceable part. That night at the office party, God, I can still smell the cheap white wine, still feel the sweat clinging to the back of my neck as I forced a smile through another mindless conversation. I overheard him. My boss. The man whose approval I had twisted myself into knots to earn. "She's replaceable," he told a junior partner, laughing as he sipped his drink, as if I were a misprinted business card or a chipped coffee mug. And something inside me, something fragile, something that had tried so hard to believe, shattered. But I didn't cry. Not then. I smiled. I walked past. I even thanked him for the opportunity when I left the party, though my stomach was in knots. I went home, kicked off my heels, sat in the dark, and let the weight of every invisible year crush me. That was 3 months ago. Since then, something has been changing inside me, slowly, deliberately, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath the surface. I have been working in silence, building connections, studying deals, spotting weaknesses, learning the angles he never saw because he was too busy smirking at the mirror. And tonight, I am sitting here, alone in my apartment, staring at a text from a client who just confirmed the $2 million deal I closed without him. My hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of knowing that this moment, this triumph, is only the beginning. Outside, the city hums quietly, the streetlights flicker, and I can feel it, the electric charge of something about to break loose. My phone buzzes again. A message from an old coworker. "Did you hear? They're panicking at the office." I smile just barely. And yet, beneath that smile, there's a flicker of unease, a thought I can't quite push away. A look I caught today in the lobby. A silence on the line during the last client call. A feeling in my gut that says, this is just the beginning. That text haunted me for days. Impressive. I stared at it, running my fingers over the cold surface of my phone, as though it might reveal some hidden truth. Was it praise? Condescension? A veiled threat? I couldn't tell. But one thing was clear: things had changed. No longer was I the quiet girl in the corner, underestimated, overlooked. No longer was I replaceable. But even in this newfound power, something felt hollow, like I had reached the top of a mountain only to find that there was nothing but clouds and the sound of my own breath echoing back at me. I was free, yes, but also exposed, like a window that had been opened, letting in the harsh wind. And with it came everything I had tried to outrun. My past, my insecurities, the weight of every choice I had ever made. It wasn't long before the cracks started to show. At work, the once familiar faces now looked at me differently, some with respect, others with thinly veiled resentment. They didn't see me as a colleague anymore, but as a threat. I was no longer invisible, but something else, something dangerous. I watched how they spoke to me now, with an edge, a wariness I hadn't seen before. Even Karen, the receptionist, who used to greet me with a knowing smile, gave me a stiff nod as I passed her desk. It was unsettling, like the walls were closing in, and I couldn't breathe. And then there was Darren. He wasn't speaking to me directly, but I could feel his eyes on me whenever I walked into the room, a lingering judgment that I couldn't escape. He never said anything, but the silence between us was louder than words. That night when he was standing by my car, I should have been afraid. But I wasn't. Not because I was brave, but because for the first time in my life I was numb. What did his opinion matter now? What did anyone's? But I wasn't prepared for the things that would come next. The things that would make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I thought I was free. I thought I had finally done it, shown them all who I really was. But the truth was darker than I had ever imagined. It started slowly, like the first thread pulling at the fabric of a carefully constructed life. My mother. She was always a mystery to me, a woman who held so many of her own secrets, but I had never questioned her. Not really. When she told me I had to be exceptional, I believed it. When she told me to push harder, to fight for everything, I listened. But one day, I found something in her room that made my blood run cold. A letter. It wasn't hers. It was in a box under her bed, buried beneath old clothes and receipts. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear. She's ready. She's the one. I didn't understand. Who was ready? Who was the one? And why was this buried so deep? When I confronted her, she said it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining the panic in her eyes, the way her voice cracked. Something had been hidden from me, and I needed to know what it was. But there were other things too. Things I had missed. The way Darren had treated me, it wasn't just dismissive, it was calculated. A subtle kind of manipulation that I hadn't recognized until it was too late. I started seeing the pattern. I wasn't the first woman he had dismissed. There were others. Women who had walked into that office with fire in their eyes, only to be smothered, one way or another. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that everything I thought I had built, my success, my career, my achievements, had all been a carefully crafted illusion. It wasn't just Darren who was a puppet master. It was all of them, everyone in that office. They had let me rise, only to tear me down when I got too close to the top. They needed me to be strong, but never too strong. Not enough to outshine them. And then came Emily. She was new, just hired a few weeks ago. She was eager, bright-eyed, the kind of woman who reminded me of myself 5 years ago, walking into this world with dreams bigger than her fear. First, I liked her. She was sweet, friendly, and she wanted to be my friend. But there was something off about her. I couldn't place it, but it lingered. She always seemed to be watching me, observing me with an intensity that was unsettling. At first, I thought it was just her ambition, her desire to learn. But then she started asking questions about my past, about the deals I had closed, about Darren. She wanted to know how I had done it, how I had gotten to the place I was. And I wanted to tell her. I wanted to share the secrets, the quiet victory I had finally earned. But then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "I've heard the rumors about you." She said it so casually, like it was nothing. But to me it felt like a knife. Rumors? What rumors? She didn't elaborate, but that was enough. I could feel it then, the shift. It wasn't just Darren who was trying to control the narrative. It was everyone. Everyone who had ever been in this world of glass and steel, pretending that they were playing a game when in reality they were the ones being played. I couldn't escape it anymore. The feeling that everything I had worked for was a lie. The moments of clarity, the victories, the smiles, it was all a charade. The only person who had been honest with me, the only person who had ever truly seen me, was the one I had tried to bury the deepest, my mother. The woman who had taught me to fight, to claw my way to the top, but had never warned me about the cost. The woman who had hidden her own secrets in boxes under the bed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But that truth was too big to ignore. And then one morning I walked into the office and the world shifted again. Darren wasn't at his desk. The office was unusually quiet. Too quiet. And then I saw it. The email. The subject line was simple. Effective immediately. Resignation of Darren Hayes. My heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of joke? But as I read the email, everything I had feared came true. He wasn't leaving because of a better opportunity. He was leaving because he was being pushed out. And the reason? It wasn't his poor performance or some corporate restructure. It was because someone had been watching him. Someone had been collecting information, and now it was his turn to be replaced. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Darren, the man who had built this empire of manipulation, had been exposed. But the twist? I was the one who had been set up. It wasn't just Darren playing the game, it was everyone. And the person who had been pulling the strings all along was me. And now as I stand here at the edge of everything I thought I knew, I can't help but wonder if I ever really had control. If I was ever really the one in charge. Because if this is the truth, then the world I've built has been a lie all along. I thought Darren's resignation would bring me relief, a sense of triumph, but instead it cracked something open inside me, something raw and trembling and ugly that I didn't know how to contain. For days I drifted through the office halls in a fog, hearing the muted congratulations, the subtle nods, the way people leaned in just a little too eagerly when I walked by. But it all felt distant, like I was floating just above my own life, watching myself from some cold, invisible perch. And then, Emily, sweet, curious Emily, appeared at my door one evening, her face soft with concern as she asked if I was okay. And I wanted to believe she meant it, that she truly cared, but something in her eyes, the flicker of curiosity mixed with something sharper, made me pause, made me wonder if she was just another player in a game I hadn't realized I was in. She sat on the edge of my desk, legs swinging slightly like a child's, and told me, almost playfully, that people were saying I had orchestrated Darren's fall, that I was the one who'd been feeding information up the chain, and I laughed out loud, sharp and bitter, because I hadn't, not intentionally, not with some grand plan, but even as I protested, I could feel the doubt worming its way through me, because what if I had? What if every little comment, every subtle complaint I'd let slip over the years had been gathered, weaponized, used without me even realizing it? And as she smiled softly as if to comfort me, I saw the edge behind her kindness, the hunger, the ambition she was barely masking, and I remembered how I'd once been like that too, and suddenly I felt cold, so very cold, like the room had tilted and I was sliding towards some edge I couldn't see. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat by the window and thought about my mother, about the letter I'd found, about the way she'd always seemed to know more than she said. She'd raised me to be exceptional, yes, but there had been moments, flickers, little slips in her mask over the years that I'd dismissed, moments when she'd looked at me not with pride but with calculation, as if I were a project she was molding, not a daughter she loved, and now I couldn't help but wonder, who had written that letter and why had she hidden it, and most importantly, who was the one? Was it me? Was it always me? Or was I just a placeholder for someone else, someone who was coming next? And that thought, that creeping, clawing doubt made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe, because maybe none of this, not the job, not the victories, not even the betrayals, had ever been about me. Maybe I was just a piece on someone else's board. And the next day, when I walked into the office, everything felt sharper, more dangerous, like the air itself was crackling with secrets I couldn't quite hear. Karen, the receptionist, who I'd once trusted, avoided my eyes, and in the break room I overheard two junior analysts whispering about an upcoming restructuring I hadn't been told about. And when I asked my closest friend at work, Melissa, she hesitated just a beat too long before brushing it off, her smile too tight, too forced, and I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that they all knew something I didn't, that I was on the outside now, watching the machinery grind forward without me. I went home early that day, sat on the edge of my bed, and let the tears come, the shaking, gut-wrenching sobs that I had held back for so long, because I didn't know who to trust, not at work, not at home, not even myself. And when the tears dried, I found myself numb, staring at the cracks in the ceiling and wondering if this was what breaking felt like, not a sudden collapse but a slow creeping unraveling, like a sweater pulled loose thread by thread, until one day you're just a pile of fabric on the floor. And then, just when I thought the day couldn't sink deeper, the doorbell rang, sharp and urgent, and when I opened it, there stood a man I hadn't seen in years, Alex, my ex, the one who had left me 5 years ago without a word, the one whose absence had carved a hollow in my chest I'd never quite managed to fill. He looked older, worn, his eyes shadowed, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost apologetic, as he told me we needed to talk, that there were things I didn't know, things he should have told me years ago but had been too afraid. And before I could stop him, before I could gather myself, he stepped inside, closed the door, and said the words that shattered the last pieces of my carefully constructed reality. Your mother isn't who you think she is. And neither are you. The world tilted, the floor seemed to drop out from under me. And in that instant, everything I had ever believed, every truth I had clung to, every certainty I had wrapped myself in like armor, dissolved into ash, leaving me standing there, trembling, gasping, on the edge of a darkness I had never seen coming. I stared at Alex, my heartbeat hammering so loud in my ears I could barely hear his words, but the look in his eyes, raw, tired, desperate, made something ancient inside me stir, something that had been asleep for too long. I let him talk, let the words spill out, each one striking like a hammer against the thin walls I had built to hold myself together. And I learned the truth I was never supposed to know, my mother, the one I had envied and feared and loved in equal measure, the one who shaped me into the sharp, polished thing I had become, had been orchestrating far more than my career. She had been orchestrating me. Alex told me how she had interfered in our relationship, how she had manipulated his past, planted doubts, made sure he would leave, and when he tried to fight back, when he tried to come clean to me, she crushed him, not with violence, no, but with cold, calculated power, the kind of influence that doesn't leave bruises but leaves scars. And Darren's fall? Not my victory, not my subtle sabotage. It had been her hand, pulling the strings from the shadows, feeding just enough poison into the right ears to make sure I rose as she wanted. And suddenly the walls of my life, the carefully curated image of success and strength and control, crumbled at my feet. I didn't speak, not right away, not even as Alex reached for me, his fingers brushing mine like we were still those two people who once believed in each other. No, I sat there, cold and still, while inside me something twisted, something hardened because the grief was too big, too heavy, and grief, I realized, is just love with nowhere to go but rage. Rage has direction, rage moves, and as I sat in the silence of my apartment, the dim light casting long shadows across the room, I felt the shift inside myself begin. Over the next few days, the world around me thinned, people became shadows, their smiles empty, their voices echoes, and I moved through it all like a ghost, gathering pieces, listening to the half-truths Melissa let slip when she thought I wasn't paying attention, watching Emily circle closer, her mask cracking just slightly when she thought no one was looking, and every night I sat by the window staring at the skyline, piecing together the new puzzle of my life. Not the one I had thought I was solving, no, this was a darker, older puzzle, one that reached back years, maybe decades, one in which I was no longer a pawn but a player. And then the confrontation came, sudden and sharp. I went home late one evening to find my mother waiting in my apartment, sitting calmly at my kitchen table like she owned the place, like she owned me, and when I demanded answers, when I spat the truth in her face, she only smiled, slow and cold, and told me I should be thanking her, that everything I had, everything I was because of her. And in that moment, something inside me shattered, the last thread of the child who wanted to please her, who wanted to be loved by her, snapped, and I felt my face go still, my body go quiet, because the fight inside me had gone underground, had turned into something quieter, sharper, deadlier. I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't cry. I just watched her, memorizing every line of her face, every flicker of her eyes, knowing that this would be the last time she saw me like this, the last time she mistook me for someone she could control. Over the next few days, people began disappearing, not physically but emotionally, withdrawing, cutting me off. Melissa stopped answering my texts. Emily's desk sat empty. Rumors floated through the office like smoke, thin and choking. And I understood then that the world was closing in, that the walls were shifting, and if I didn't move, if I didn't change, I would be crushed. I started planning, not loudly, not recklessly, but in the quiet hours late at night, when the city hummed softly outside my window. I pulled out old files, old emails, old letters I had buried long ago. I tracked connections, traced threads, and I found things they thought I'd never notice, hidden accounts, secret meetings, backroom deals, and piece by piece, I began to assemble the weapon I would use, not a gun, not a knife, but truth sharpened and precise. And then one night as I was working late, I noticed the locked drawer in my mother's old study, a place I hadn't dared touch for years, but now I wasn't afraid. I broke it open, my hands steady, and inside I found the letter, the one that changed everything, the one that proved she had been planning my rise and my fall from the very beginning. And as I sat there, holding the paper in my trembling hands, I felt something inside me settle, something cold and clear, because I understood now that this wasn't just about survival, it wasn't just about reclaiming my life. This was war, a quiet, calculated war, and I was no longer the girl who waited to be saved or destroyed. I was the one who would burn it all down if I had to. And as I folded the letter, slipped it into my pocket, and turned off the light, I looked at my reflection in the dark window and felt the last trace of fear slip away, leaving only the quiet, steady certainty of a woman who has nothing left to lose. And that's when I stopped being afraid. The night I decided to end it all. Not my life, but this war, this endless twisting game of power and betrayal. The city felt unusually quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting. I sat alone in my apartment, the letter burning a hole in my pocket, the truth echoing in my head. Everything I had, everything I thought I was, had been sculpted by hands I once trusted, a mother who saw me not as a daughter but as a weapon, a tool, a mirror to reflect her own power back at her. And as I watched the city lights shimmer beyond the glass, I realized this was no longer about proving myself or reclaiming a stolen life. This was about burning the house down, every room, every lie, every mask. I set the plan in motion the next morning, cool and methodical, sending the files, the hidden accounts, the betrayal timelines to every journalist, board member, and silent partner whose hands had once fed from her table. And I watched, almost detached, as the news spread like wildfire, the empire she had built on secrets and manipulation crumbling in real time. But revenge, I learned, is never clean, never surgical. It drags you down, stains you, reshapes you, and in the middle of my carefully plotted takedown, came the twist I hadn't seen. Alex, the man who had come back to help me, the man I thought was my last safe place, had been working with her all along. His confession, his tears, his broken regret, all staged, all rehearsed, part of the final play she had orchestrated. To break me once and for all. And when I confronted him, when I saw the flicker of guilt, of truth cross his face, I felt something cold and final settle inside me, the last piece falling into place. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't beg for answers. I just walked away because the real revenge wasn't in destroying them, it was in surviving them, in refusing to be the thing they had shaped, in walking out of the fire whole, even if scarred. And so on the last day, when the boardroom exploded, with accusations and the press swarmed the building, when my mother's name became a headline, when Alex stood alone watching it all collapse, I slipped away, unseen, unheard, a ghost moving through the wreckage. I found myself at the old pier where I used to come as a child, back when the world was simpler, or at least when I was too young to see the cracks. And as I sat there, watching the water move beneath the wooden boards, I felt the weight of it all. Not just the revenge, not just the betrayal, but the slow realization that in trying to win, I had become something I didn't recognize, sharper, harder, colder. I pulled the last letter from my pocket, one she had written years ago, one I had found hidden behind the locked drawer, a letter not of love but of calculation, her words spelling out the life she wanted for me, the moves I was supposed to make, the sacrifices I was meant to endure. And as I read it, I realized the final twist wasn't that I had beaten her. It was that I had fulfilled her plan in the end, that even in breaking free, I had become the ruthless, untouchable woman she had always intended me to be. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, and I stood, feeling the breeze on my face, knowing that the war was over, but the cost was written deep inside me. I walked slowly, deliberately, away from the pier, the letter slipping from my fingers into the wind, and as I disappeared into the city, into the noise and the lights and the anonymity, I knew that this wasn't a victory anyone would celebrate, but it was mine. And if you stayed this long, you already know this wasn't just a story, this was a warning. Don't let them shape you, don't let them make you, because by the time you realize what you've become, it might already be too late. Subscribe and remember me.